Imagine this, a land of just breathtaking beauty, snow-capped mountains, these serene lakes, and this place becomes the absolute center of a century of huge transformation, really intense controversy, and these profound shifts in power. That's the story we're diving into today. The Dogra Rule in Kashmir, a really pivotal period stretching from 1846 right up to 1947 CE.
Yeah, and you've given us a fascinating stack of sources here. They detail the reigns of 4 key Maharajas and all the tumultuous events that really shaped this princely state during that time.
So our mission for this deep dive, really, is to unpack this incredibly complex era. We want to pull out the most crucial pieces of knowledge and try to understand how a Hindu Rajput dynasty ended up ruling a Muslim-majority region. What did that rule actually mean for the diverse communities living there?
Absolutely. We'll explore the administrative side, the social currents, the political dynamics that define this period, taking us right up to that critical, chaotic moment of India's partition.
We'll journey through key treaties, look closely at pivotal leadership decisions, and also the often unseen impact on the ordinary people. We expect to uncover some, surprising facts, I think, and really shed light on a critical chapter in South Asian history. So yeah, let's get into this fascinating narrative.
Okay, so to really grasp the genesis of Dogra Rule, we need to set the historical stage first. We have to look at the backdrop. The Sikh Empire.
Right.
The Dogra dynasty's rise is just intricately linked to the decline of this really powerful empire. Under Maharaja Ranjit Singh, it had unified a huge part of northern India. This empire, established back in 1799, had already annexed Jammu in 1808, and then Kashmir itself in 1819. So these regions were already integrated into a centralized state, with Lahore as its capital.
That's a really important point. Kashmir wasn't like an independent entity just before the Dogras took over. It had this history of being absorbed into larger regional powers, so it was already under Sikh control. And Ranjit Singh's administration, interestingly, despite its military might, it was known for a somewhat meritocratic approach, wasn't it?
It was, surprisingly so in some ways. And that meritocratic aspect is absolutely key to understanding how someone like Gulab Singh rose so prominently within that very system.
Okay, tell us about it.
Well, Gulab Singh was a very shrewd Dogra Rajput from the Jamwal clan, hailing from the Shivalik Hills area. He joined the Sikh army way back in 1809. His skill in battle, his leadership, his martial prowess, you could say, combined with a sharp political mind, allowed him to rise through the ranks really quickly.
Impressively fast, it seems.
Very. By 1820, Maharaja Ranjit Singh himself appointed him the hereditary Raja of Jammu. He was granted a Jagir, which is basically a land grant, recognizing his service and ensuring his loyalty, And it wasn't just him. His brothers, Dan Singh and Sushit Singh, also gained incredibly prominent positions. Dan Singh even became the Sikh Empire's prime minister.
Wow, the prime minister.
Yeah, so you see this consolidation of Dogra influence right at the heart of the Lahore court. They became a really powerful faction within the empire.
So Gulab Singh wasn't an outsider trying to break in. He was a major player within the Sikh system long before he established his own state. He was a product of the empire he'd eventually, outmaneuver.
Exactly. His family's deep roots and influence in the Sikh administration were absolutely crucial. That's how he accumulated so much power and land. He understood the system from the inside.
Which suggests he must have been a master politician, navigating that volatile Sikh court. What kind of strategies do you think he used to climb so quickly? It couldn't have been easy.
Oh, definitely not. He was a master of appearing loyal while building his own power base. He kept a public face of loyalty to Ranjit Singh, but behind the scenes, he was expanding his influence, mainly through military means and smart alliances. He had this uncanny ability, it seems, to read the court politics, play factions against each other, without ever fully committing until it served his purpose.
Calculated.
Very calculated. And his military campaigns, especially those led by his general Zorawar Singh, weren't just about grabbing land. They were a signal, a demonstration of his growing power, independent of Lahore politics. He was building a territorial base.
And that skill set became even more critical after Ranjit Singh's death in 1839, right?
Yeah.
That plunged the empire into chaos.
Absolute chaos. A severe succession crisis.
Yeah.
Assassinations, intense rivalries between different factions vying for the throne. The central authority just crumbled. And Gulab Singh, he skillfully leveraged this turmoil. He didn't just hang onto his power base in Jammu. He actively expanded it. He consolidated his position while the empire fractured around him.
Right. And this is where General Zorawar Singh comes in again, with those major annexations.
Exactly. Under Zorawar Singh, the Dogras launched these incredibly daring campaigns. They annexed Ladakh in 1834, then Baltistan in 1840. This pushed their control right up to the borders of Tibet and Central Asia, a massive expansion of their sphere of influence.
So he wasn't just surviving the chaos, he was actively using it to carve out his own domain.
Precisely. It wasn't just survival, it was strategic expansion. Annexing Ladakh and Baltistan was a huge territorial gain. It showed military strength far beyond just, internal Sikh squabbles. These campaigns really highlight Gulab Singh's ambition. He was using the empire's internal weakness to forge this distinct, powerful entity.
Which inevitably leads to conflict with another rising power, the British East India Company. The First Anglo-Sikh War, 1845-1846. A major turning point.
A monumental turning point. The British decisively defeated the Sikh forces. This led to the Treaty of Lahore, signed on March 9, 1846. And the terms were incredibly harsh for the Sikhs. They were forced to give up huge territories, including Kashmir itself, and they had to pay this massive war indemnity, Rs 1.5 crore. That's 15 million rupees, an absolutely crippling sum at the time.
15 million rupees. Wow. Designed to break them financially.
Completely. And here's the crucial twist. The Sikh Durbar, their government, led by figures like Lal Singh and Tej Singh, they simply couldn't pay. They were bankrupt after the war.
So they couldn't meet the demand.
Couldn't meet it. So they were forced to surrender Kashmir directly to the British as part of the payment. And this is pivotal because the British got Kashmir not through fighting for it directly, but as essentially war reparations. This created an opportunity for them, a strategic realignment rather than taking on the burden of direct administration themselves. They had this valuable asset, but maybe didn't want to govern it directly.
Which leads us straight to this infamous deal, the one often called the sale of a people, the Treaty of Amritsar.
That's the one. Just a week later, March 16, 1846. The Treaty of Amritsar, signed between the British East India Company and Gulab Singh, it formalized the transfer of Kashmir and all its dependencies to Gulab Singh. And the price, Rs 75 lakh Nanak-Shahi rupees.
75 lakh. 7.5 million.
Yeah.
Less than the original indemnity.
Exactly. Reduced from the 1 crore the Sikhs couldn't pay. It partly reflected the Sikh Durbar's insolvency, but also British pragmatism. They wanted a reliable ally more than the full cash amount right then. And using Nanak-Shahi rupees, the Sikh currency, just underscores the specific financial context of that moment.
So basically a discount on a kingdom, an entire region, its people, its strategic importance.
Pretty much. The treaty itself had 10 articles. It formally recognized Gulab Singh as the independent Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir. It clearly laid out his new territory, eastward of the river Indus and westward of the river Ravi, including Chamba and excluding Lahore, a vast area. And it also stipulated this annual tribute to the British.
The tribute, what was it?
Very specific. 1 horse, 12 shawl goats, 6 male, 6 female, and 3 pairs of high-quality Kashmiri shawls.
Goats and shawls.
Yeah. It sounds almost symbolic, but that specific tribute clause clearly underlined his status. He wasn't fully sovereign. He was a British vassal. The British justification was purely pragmatic. Reward a loyal ally, ensure stability in a crucial region, avoid direct administrative costs. This was all part of their great game strategy.
Right, the great game. Can you quickly unpack that for us? How did Kashmir fit in?
Sure. The Great Game was this intense rivalry, this political and diplomatic chess match between the British and Russian empires during the 19th century. They were both expanding across Central Asia. And Kashmir. Its location was incredibly strategic, bordering Afghanistan, Tibet, Central Asia. It was prime real estate on that geopolitical chessboard. For the British, having a loyal, stable state like Jammu and Kashmir under Gulab Singh acted as a vital buffer zone. It protected British India from potential Russian advances, and it gave them eyes and ears, control over key trade routes and mountain passes. So that treaty, the price, the tribute, it all, cemented Gulab Singh's dependence on the British. He became a key piece in their imperial defense. And the reduced price just highlights how desperate the Sikh Empire was financially, and how willing the British were to trade cash for loyalty.
But this treaty, as you said, was hugely controversial from the very beginning. That phrase, sale of a people, used by Kashmiri leaders and historians like Prem Nath Bazaz, it speaks volumes.
It really does. Critics argued, quite powerfully, that it treated the region and its inhabitants like commodities, just things to be bought and sold. There was absolutely no consultation with the local people. And the sale became this deep, lasting grievance. It poisoned relations, fueled narratives of exploitation for the next 100 years, casting this long shadow over the entire Dogra Rule.
And it wasn't just a future grievance, was it? There was immediate pushback.
Oh, absolutely. Immediate resistance. Sheikh Imamuddin, who was the governor appointed by the Sikhs in Kashmir, he flat out refused to hand over control to Gulab Singh. He led a pretty significant rebellion, backed by local elites and parts of the Sikh army. Gulab Singh found himself facing a serious challenge right away, and crucially, he needed and received direct British military help to put down that revolt.
So the British had to step in militarily from day one.
Yes, it was only with British troops and guns supporting him that he managed to suppress the rebellion. By November 1846, he was finally formally installed as Maharaja in Srinagar, but under British protection, essentially.
That British intervention seems absolutely critical then. It really underscores their role in establishing and maintaining Dogra Rule right from the outset. And it shows that this wasn't some universally welcome transition. It was imposed, backed by external force. Thinking about that, how different might things have been if the British hadn't intervened right then? If that initial rebellion had succeeded?
That's a massive what if, isn't it? Without that immediate British military backing, Gulab Singh's hold on Kashmir would have been incredibly shaky, maybe impossible to maintain, if the rebellion had succeeded. You could have seen continued instability, maybe fragmentation of the region, or perhaps the British deciding they had to step in and rule directly after all, which they initially wanted to avoid. The legitimacy of Dogra Rule in the eyes of many Kashmiris was arguably compromised from the start because it relied so heavily on this outside power. It set a precedent, this reliance on external forces, that would continue throughout their rule. So that intervention cemented the Dogras, but it also planted these deep seeds of resentment about their legitimacy.
Okay, so Gulab Singh is installed. Let's dive into his reign, his legacy, from 1846 to 1856. He's now ruler of this vast, incredibly diverse state, roughly 84,000 square miles. Huge range of geography, ethnicities, religions.
A massive challenge. His primary goal had to be unification and centralization. He had to bring these disparate parts, Kashmir Valley, Ladakh, Gilgit, under one administrative umbrella. So he appointed governors for these key regions, their job: collect revenue, maintain law and order, oversee the military, all reporting back to him in Jammu or Srinagar.
And the military campaigns continued. Or had they peaked earlier?
Well, the major expansionist campaigns under Zorawar Singh happened mostly before Gulab Singh became Maharaja of the whole state. Remember, Ladakh, 1834, and Baltistan, 1840, were already secured. But there was that disastrous attempt to invade Tibet in 1841-42, where Zorawar Singh was killed. That really showed the limits of their reach. It highlights the huge geographical and cultural hurdles in governing this sprawling state. The military was key for control, but it wasn't invincible, especially in that terrain.
And the state he was forging, it would gain status later on, getting that 21-gun salute by 1921. But the foundations were being laid here, often quite harshly. Let's talk about the administration. You mentioned earlier he relied heavily on Kashmiri Pandits.
Incredibly heavily. This Hindu minority, less than 5% of Kashmir's population, they were entrusted with almost all the key bureaucratic jobs: revenue collection, the judiciary, record keeping. This created a loyal administrative class for him, sure, but it had massive consequences for everyone else.
What kind of consequences?
Well, it immediately created this significant communal divide. The Muslim majority, over 70% of the population in Kashmir Valley, were effectively shut out from positions of power and influence. And this cemented the perception of Dogra Rule as an external alien imposition. Power wasn't shared, it was held by the Maharaja and administered through this small, privileged minority group. The whole system, with local officials called tehsildars reporting up the chain, was designed primarily for revenue collection, not for the welfare of the people. And that often led to corruption and exploitation by officials on the ground.
Which brings us to the economic policies. You said they were extractive.
Overtly extractive, yes. Designed specifically to stabilize his finances after paying that huge sum to the British for the Treaty of Amritsar. Land revenue was set at incredibly high rates, sometimes up to 2/3 of the agricultural produce, payable in cash or kind, and strictly enforced by that network of Pandit officials.
2/3, that's astronomical.
It's crushing. And then there was the shawl bafi, the shawl weaving industry, a cornerstone of Kashmir's economy, employing maybe 25,000 weavers at the time. It was also heavily taxed. Weavers might have had to pay up to 30% of their earnings straight to the state. This led to protests in Srinagar as early as 1847. People were desperate.
And on top of the taxes.
There was forced labor, begar. Villagers were legally required to provide unpaid labor for state projects, building roads, transporting goods and military supplies, often across dangerous mountain passes, usually with no compensation at all. So these policies, while they worked to stabilize the Maharaja's finances, they absolutely impoverished the peasantry, especially the Muslim majority. It was a direct result of the debt from buying Kashmir, and those petitions to the British in the 1850s, they clearly show people crying out against the taxes and begar.
Culturally, though, Gulab Singh did promote certain things, a Hindu-centric identity.
Yes, very much so. He was a major patron of Hindu temples, like the Grand Raghunath Temple complex in Jammu, and older sites like Krimchi. These often featured mural paintings blending Dogra and Mughal artistic styles. His court attracted poets, historians, Sanskrit scholars. He commissioned works like the Gulabnama, that chronicle of his reign written by Diwan Kirparam. He supported traditional Dogra arts too, like the Kud dance, and fostered literature in Dogri and Persian.
So an effort to build a Dogra cultural identity for the state.
For the elite, yes. It enriched the Dogra elite, fostered cohesion among Hindus, especially in Jammu, but it had very limited impact on the broader population, particularly Muslims. They were largely excluded from these cultural patronage networks, just as they were from administration. Socially, the policies were discriminatory. Muslims faced restrictions like being barred from owning land in certain areas, especially urban centers. And as we noted, external observers like William Moorcroft, even before the formal Dogra Rule, described their treatment of locals harshly, like an owner's treatment of unruly cattle.
That's a chilling comparison. It paints a picture of deeply embedded inequality and a sense of alienation for the majority. How did people respond across the different regions?
It varied significantly, and that set the stage for future tensions. In Jammu, the Dogra heartland, Hindus, particularly Rajputs, generally supported the Maharaja. He was a symbol of their regional pride, their martial tradition. His patronage of Hindu institutions cemented that loyalty. But in Kashmir, the Muslim majority deeply resented the authoritarian rule, the discrimination, the economic hardship, the heavy taxes, the bagar. It created widespread poverty and bitterness. Early resistance, like Sheikh Amamuddin's rebellion, was crushed, often with British help, which only reinforced the view of the Dogras as outside rulers propped up by imperial power. And even in Ladakh, the Buddhist population faced economic hardship. Monks petitioned for tax relief in 1853, but got little response. There was sporadic unrest elsewhere, too, like that massacre of the Dogra garrison in Gilgit in 1851. So while Jammu was the loyal base, discontent simmered, often suppressed in Kashmir and the peripheral regions.
Okay, let's move on to the next Maharaja, Ranbir Singh. He takes over in 1856, relatively young, 26 years old, and rules until 1885. What was his focus?
Ranbir Singh really aimed to build on his father's foundations to strengthen and consolidate the state. He put a lot of effort into creating a formal legal framework. He introduced civil and criminal codes. Interestingly, they drew on both Hindu Dharmashastra traditions and Islamic Sharia principles, perhaps an attempt to create a more universally applicable system.
It's like a modernizing step.
In theory, yes. But the administration of these laws remained largely in the hands of Pandit officials. And the Ranbir Penal Code, introduced in 1870, while it standardized punishments, often ended up favoring Hindu elites. Muslims frequently faced harsher penalties for similar offenses, so the bias persisted in practice.
And militarily, did he continue the expansion?
He did focus on military strength. Under Colonel Devi Singh, the army grew quite significantly by 1875. Sources mention around 22,000 infantry, 4,000 cavalry, 3,000 artillerymen, a formidable force. And they did expand control, annexing Hunza and Nagar up in the north in the 1870s, pushing closer to those sensitive borders, relevant again to the Great Game. He even mandated that every Dogra family had to provide one member for the army, ensuring a loyal recruitment pool.
That loyalty paid off during the 1857 Indian Rebellion, didn't it? He supported the British.
He did. He sent troops to help the British suppress the rebellion elsewhere in India, and that earned him significant rewards. He received the Order of the Star of India in 1861, and crucially, that 21-gun salute status for the state. It really elevated Jammu and Kashmir's position within the hierarchy of princely states.
Politically, he seems to have been quite adept, too, resisting some British influence.
Yes, he skillfully navigated his relationship with the British. When they proposed stationing a permanent British resident in his state in 1858, which would have meant much greater oversight, he managed to negotiate terms to limit their influence, maintaining a degree of control over internal affairs. He also established a state council in 1875 with trusted advisors like Dewan Hari Chan to try and streamline governance, manage revenue, justice, military affairs.
But who was on this council? Did it reflect the state's diversity?
That's the key issue. The council notably excluded Muslim representation. So even as he's streamlining administration, he's reinforcing those communal disparities at the highest levels of power. Economically, things remained tough for the majority. Policies were still primarily extractive. Land revenue demand stayed high, around 50–60% of produce, hitting Kashmir's rice farmers hard. The shawl industry, still employing maybe 30,000 weavers, was struggling. Taxes were high, ours is 6 per shawl, and competition from European machine-made textiles was increasing. The Franco-Prussian War in 1870 also disrupted European markets, hurting exports badly.
So economic decline for a key industry. And bigger.
Begar continued rigorously, a constant burden. Ranbir Singh did introduce a state mint in Srinagar, issuing copper and silver coins to standardize the currency. That sounds like modernization again.
Right, but you mentioned earlier how standardizing currency could sometimes hurt the peasantry.
Exactly. It's counterintuitive, but in that kind of system, forcing peasants to pay fixed cash taxes when the value of their produce might be falling, or when they struggle to access markets to get cash, it can trap them in debt. The shift to a cash economy without safety nets or fair pricing often made things worse for the most vulnerable, even if it looked like progress on paper.
Culturally, Ranbir Singh followed his father's path, patronizing Hindu culture.
Very much so. He founded the Dharmarth Trust in 1860, specifically to manage Hindu temples and shrines, ensuring their upkeep through land grants. Major temples like Raghunath in Jammu and Ranbireshwar became major cultural centers, hosting large festivals. His court supported Pahari miniature painting, traditional theater like the Heron Theater. He also set up a translation bureau in Srinagar, translating Sanskrit and Persian works into Dogri and Hindi. And he commissioned a re-edited version of the Rajataranjini, that ancient history of Kashmir, which helped legitimize Dogra Rule by linking it to the region's deep past.
But again, the focus was very much Hindu-centric.
Overwhelmingly. While preserving valuable heritage, it further marginalized Muslim cultural identity and practices. Socially, the exclusion continued, maybe even deepened. Pandits held even more administrative posts, over 80% of senior roles by 1875. Muslims still faced restrictions on land ownership in key areas and were subject to bigar. Educational initiatives like Sanskrit schools primarily benefited the Hindu elites. Muslim access to formal education remained extremely limited, hindering social mobility. The socioeconomic gap was widening.
So his reign is described as relatively stable, fewer open rebellions than his father's, but it sounds like a deceptive stability.
I think that's a fair assessment. In Jammu, his patronage and reforms kept the Dogra community loyal. His military successes added to his prestige there. But in Kashmir, Muslim discontent was growing, even if it wasn't erupting into large-scale revolt. It was being expressed through petitions to the British resident in the 1870s. These petitions clearly laid out the grievances: taxes, bigar, exclusion from government. But the British largely ignored them. Why? Because Ranbir Singh was a loyal, strategic ally. Their geopolitical interests trumped concerns about internal conditions. Even in Ladakh, Buddhist monks kept seeking tax relief, were denied, leading to some localized unrest in Leh in 1878. So yes, stable on the surface, but resentment was definitely festering underneath, especially in Kashmir.
Okay, let's move into the next era. Maharaja Pratap Singh, who ruled for a long time, 1885 to 1925. He takes over at 37. What were the key features of his reign?
Pratap Singh's reign was marked by a couple of key things. One was ongoing administrative inefficiency and accusations of mismanagement. He relied on a tight circle, including his brother Amar Singh and Pandit advisors. The other major factor was significantly increased British oversight. The British were becoming distrustful of the state's internal affairs, its efficiency.
So they intervened more directly.
Yes. In 1885, they appointed a permanent British resident, Walter Lawrence. This drastically reduced Pratap Singh's actual autonomy. Lawrence had considerable influence, and Lawrence's reports were quite critical. He noted widespread corruption, neglect of the peasants' welfare, described the administration as a mass of confusion.
That's quite blunt from a British official about an allied state.
It is. It shows the level of concern. Yet, paradoxically, despite these constraints and criticisms, Pratap Singh's reign saw a lot of infrastructure development. Real modernization in terms of bricks and mortar. Well, the Chellam Valley Cart Road, completed in 1890, that was huge. It linked Srinagar to Rawalpindi in British India, massively improving trade and military movement. A major engineering feat. Then a railway link connecting Jammu to Sialkot in British India, established in 1897, that integrated the state further into the wider colonial economy. Telegraph lines came in 1895, improving communication, and the Ranbir Canal, finished in 1911, irrigated a large area in Jammu, boosting agriculture there. These projects were funded by state revenues, and the state budget actually doubled during his reign, from about 25 lakh rupees to 50 lakh by 1910.
So a definite push for infrastructure modernization. You'd think that would bring widespread benefits, but you also mentioned skewed benefits earlier.
Right. And that seems to be the pattern here, too. While these projects were significant, the benefits often flowed upwards. The roads helped merchants and the military. The canal boosted agriculture, but likely benefited landowners more than tenant farmers. Plus, we have to ask, who built these things? Often, it still involved begar, forced labor. So the poorest might be building the infrastructure that primarily benefited the elites or the state's strategic interests. And the increased British oversight, while maybe intended to improve efficiency, also meant a loss of sovereignty for the Maharaja. It's a complex picture.
What about the economic situation for ordinary people? Did things improve with these modernization efforts?
Not substantially, it seems. There were some attempts to modernize revenue collection, like introducing fixed assessments in some areas to reduce arbitrary demands. But land revenue rates remained very high, around 50% of produce. Begar persisted. The shawl industry just continued its downward spiral. High taxes are 7 per shawl by 1900, and low wages forced weavers to migrate to Punjab for work. The workforce dropped below 20,000 by 1900. A vital part of the traditional economy was collapsing.
And the social exclusion of Muslims?
That remained deeply entrenched. Restrictions on land ownership, very limited access to government jobs. By 1900, estimates suggest over 90% of senior administrative posts were held by Hindus, mainly Pandits. Education access for Muslims was still incredibly poor, enrollment below 10%, hindering any chance of closing that gap. So despite some superficial reforms, the core economic burdens and social discrimination continued.
This sounds like a recipe for growing unrest. You mentioned the British resident, Albion Banerjee, resigning in 1920 and calling conditions unbearable.
Yes, that was a powerful indictment. He cited corruption, high taxes, communal bias. It showed that even the British were becoming aware of, or perhaps concerned about, the depth of the problems. And crucially, this period sees the beginnings of organized Muslim resistance. Groups like the Anjuman-i-Nusratul Islam, founded in 1899, started advocating for educational and economic reforms. It marks a shift from just individual grievances or petitions to more collective organized efforts, a rising political consciousness. Petitions in the 1890s and 1900s demanding political representation, relief from Begar, they were still largely ignored, which only fueled this emerging organizational drive.
And while this was happening in Kashmir, support for the Maharaja remained strong in Jammu among Hindus, and Ladakh was relatively quiet.
Broadly, yes. In Jammu, the Dogra elites continued to benefit from state patronage. Hindu support remained the bedrock of the regime. In Ladakh, Buddhist communities still faced economic hardship, protested occasionally, like in Leh 1910 over taxes, but lacked the same level of organized, widespread resistance seen emerging in Kashmir. But those seeds of organized resistance in Kashmir, as you said, were about to bloom into something much bigger, challenging the very foundation of Dogra Rule.
Which brings us to the final Dogra Maharaja, Hari Singh. He comes to power in 1925, age 30. And he's ruling in a very different India, right? Political awareness is surging across the subcontinent.
Absolutely. A completely different climate. The Indian National Congress, the Muslim League, mass movements demanding rights and self-rule were reshaping the political landscape. Hari Singh himself was educated differently than his predecessors. Mayo College in India, time in England. He was exposed to modern ideas of governance. But fundamentally, he maintained an autocratic approach. He wasn't inclined to give up significant power easily.
Did he attempt reforms early on?
He did focus on some administrative modernization, and crucially, he finally abolished Begar in 1929. That was a huge step, responding to decades of protests and suffering, a major concession, even if very late. He also introduced that bicameral legislature, the Praja Sabha, in 1934, 75 members, 33 of them elected.
A step towards democracy.
A very small, very cautious step. The Praja Sabha's powers were extremely limited. It was widely seen as a token gesture, designed to appease critics rather than genuinely share power. He did expand education, setting up colleges in Srinagar and Jammu, but access remained skewed. Muslim enrollment was still below 15% by 1930. Infrastructure projects continued, like the Banihal Cart Road improving connectivity, but funding still relied on high taxes, and land revenue was still around 45%. And the shawl industry pretty much collapsed by this point, weavers earning desperately low wages.
So some reforms, like ending Begar, were significant, but overall too little too late. The fundamental issues of discrimination and lack of representation weren't really addressed.
That's largely how it was perceived, yes. The limitations of the Praja Sabha, the persistent economic and educational gaps, it all meant the underlying grievances remained potent. And these simmering tensions then exploded in the 1931 uprising, a truly pivotal moment.
What triggered it?
It started in Jammu, actually. In April 1931, police disrupted a Friday sermon at a mosque. They claimed there were seditious references to the Quran being made. This was seen by Muslims as a deliberate, calculated insult to their religion, a direct affront. Protests erupted immediately in Jammu and quickly spread to Srinagar. Urban Muslims in Srinagar started organizing public meetings. Then, on June 25th, a man named Abdul Qadir, who was apparently an employee of a British officer, gave this incredibly fiery speech outside the main Kanker Mullah Mosque in Srinagar. He urged people to rise up against Dogra oppression, invoking Islamic solidarity, anti-colonial feelings. His speech really struck a chord with the crowd. He was promptly arrested for sedition.
So, perceived religious insult combined with suppression of speech. A volatile mix.
Extremely volatile. Qadir's arrest became the immediate catalyst. On July 13, 1931, huge crowds, thousands of people, gathered outside Srinagar Central Jail demanding his release. It started peacefully, but things turned ugly. Dogra police, crucially backed by British Indian troops stationed in the city, confronted the protesters. When demonstrators tried to storm the jail, the security forces opened fire, indiscriminately, by many accounts.
Opened fire on the crowd.
Yes. At least 20 people were killed, over 100 injured, according to contemporary reports. This event became known almost immediately as Martyrs' Day. It sent shockwaves through the region. It wasn't just about specific grievances anymore. It became a symbol of broader oppression, galvanizing resistance against Dogra rule itself. Violence spread. Markets shut down. Peasants refused to pay taxes. The state imposed martial law. The British got heavily involved, pressuring Hari Singh to control the situation.
That date, July 13th, Martyrs' Day, it's still commemorated, isn't it? Shows a profound impact.
Absolutely. It became a foundational moment for modern Kashmiri nationalism. The brutal response, rather than crushing dissent, solidified this collective memory of state violence. And the involvement of British Indian troops again underlined the Dogra regime's reliance on external power.
How did the political landscape change after 1931?
It catalyzed organized politics in a way nothing had before. In October 1932, Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah, a young, charismatic teacher from Srinagar, founded the All Jammu and Kashmir Muslim Conference, MC. This brought together Muslim leaders from different regions, Kashmir, Jammu, Poonch, under one banner for the first time. Their demands were clear: political representation, end discriminatory laws, economic relief for peasants and weavers. Initially, the focus was on Muslim unity, given the context, but they also sought alliances with progressive Hindus and Sikhs who opposed the autocracy.
So a unified, organized political movement emerges, with Sheikh Abdullah at the helm. How did Hari Singh respond?
With limited reforms, again. He appointed the Glancy Commission in 1932, headed by a British official, B.J. Glancy, to look into the grievances. The commission's report in 1933 was quite direct. It acknowledged the systemic bias against Muslims and recommended increased representation in government jobs, better educational access, land reforms.
Did Hari Singh implement the recommendations?
Partially and grudgingly. He reserved about 30% of administrative posts for Muslims, established some new schools, but it was widely seen as cosmetic. The Praja Sabha, expanded in 1934, still lacked real power. The fundamental resistance to genuine power sharing remained. This just fueled more discontent.
And the Muslim conference under Abdullah evolved.
Yes, significantly. The 1931 uprising had politicized the Muslim population like never before. The MC grew into a genuine mass movement. Then, in 1939, a major strategic shift. The MC transformed itself into the Jammu and Kashmir National Conference, NC. Crucially, it adopted a secular platform. The aim was to broaden its appeal, bring non-Muslims, especially Pandits and Sikhs, into the fold. The slogan became "Justice for All," though realistically its core support remained Muslim.
And they produced that manifesto, Naya Kashmir.
Yes, in 1944. Naya Kashmir, or New Kashmir, it was a really radical document for its time. It outlined a vision for a socialist state, land redistribution, free education, equal rights, heavily influenced by Soviet ideas and Indian nationalist thinking. This vision deeply alienated the old Dogra elites, obviously, but it electrified peasants and workers. It offered a completely different future, challenging the entire feudal autocratic system.
So the political landscape is getting much more complex, more polarized. Hari Singh is facing pressure from the NC, still relying on the British. What about other groups?
Right, things were fragmenting. In Jammu, you saw the rise of Hindu-dominated groups like the Jammu Praja Parishad, formed in 1947, who supported Hari Singh and increasingly advocated for joining India. In Poonch and Mirpur, those Muslim-majority areas with strong military traditions, ex-servicemen from World War II were forming their own committees, demanding redress for their specific grievances. Hari Singh's administration just struggled to cope. Reforms were inadequate. The economy was still in dire straits. The shawl industry basically dead by the 1940s. It was a state under immense pressure from multiple directions.
Which brings us right to the edge, the final years, 1946, 1947. The Quit Kashmir movement starts in 46.
Yes, launched by the National Conference. The demand was simple and direct. Abolish Dogra Rule completely, establish a democratic government, end the monarchy. Sheikh Abdullah gave these powerful speeches in Lal Chowk, Srinagar's main square, denouncing the feudal tyranny. He kept bringing up the Treaty of Amritsar, calling it a colonial betrayal, arguing the Dogras had no right to rule. The movement gained huge traction. Thousands joined protests. Hari Singh's government cracked down hard again, arresting Abdullah and over 1,000 activists.
Did the crackdown work?
No, it completely backfired. It just strengthened the NC's resolve, made Abdullah even more of a popular hero, and all this was happening as British India was clearly heading towards independence, which gave the movement even more urgency and weight. Invoking the Treaty of Amritsar was a potent move. It reframed the entire century of Dogra rule as illegitimate from the start, resonating deeply with many Kashmiris.
Then comes partition in 1947. June 3rd, the plan is announced. Princely states have to choose: India, Pakistan, or independence.
Theoretically, independence was an option, as British paramountcy, their ultimate authority, was lapsing. Hari Singh desperately wanted to preserve his autonomy, maybe dreamed of an independent Kashmir. So he proposed a standstill agreement with both India and Pakistan, basically keep existing arrangements for trade, communication, etc., while he decided. Buy some time. Pakistan accepted the standstill agreement on August 12, 1947. India, however, stalled. They wanted further negotiations, signaling their strong strategic interest in Kashmir, ceding fully to India.
His indecision created a power vacuum, didn't it? At a critical moment.
A very dangerous one. While he was trying to figure out this impossible choice, things were unraveling on the ground. In Poonch, that region with long-standing grievances,
The rebellion flared up again.
yes, escalated dramatically. The no-tax campaign by ex-servicemen that started in July turned into a full-blown armed uprising by August, led by figures like Sardar Abdul Qayyum. Rebels captured several towns. The Dogra state forces were overwhelmed and retreated towards Jammu by September. This internal rebellion severely weakened Hari Singh's control before anything else happened.
And it provided a pretext for outside involvement.
Arguably, yes. It showed the state was losing control internally. Then, on October 2010, 1947, the situation escalated dramatically with the tribal invasion. Thousands of Pathan tribesmen from Pakistan's northwest frontier province, clearly supported and likely orchestrated by elements within Pakistan, swept into Kashmir. They captured Muzaffarabad, then Baramulla, committing widespread atrocities, looting, killing, abduction documented even in international press like the Times of London. They advanced rapidly towards Srinagar.
Srinagar itself was threatened.
Yes, the capital was on the verge of falling.
Yeah.
Hari Singh's forces were collapsing. Facing complete defeat, he made a desperate appeal to India for military help on October 24th.
But India's response was conditional.
Yes, India agreed to help, but only if Hari Singh formally acceded to India. So, on October 26, 1947, under immense pressure, Hari Singh signed the Instrument of Accession. This ceded control over three key areas: defense, foreign affairs, and communications to India.
And Lord Mountbatten, the Governor-General, accepted it.
He accepted it on October 27th. But crucially, Mountbatten added a note saying that once law and order were restored, the question of the state's accession should be settled by a reference to the people, a plebiscite. That plebiscite promise, of course, was never fulfilled due to the ensuing conflict and political deadlock, becoming a major point of contention ever since.
Indian troops arrived immediately.
Yes, airlifted into Srinagar, literally on October 27th. They managed to halt the tribal advance just outside the city and push them back, saving Srinagar. But this also marked the start of the First Indo-Pakistan War over Kashmir.
And the accession itself remains deeply controversial.
Highly controversial. Pakistan immediately contested its legal validity. They argued Hari Singh didn't really have the authority to sign it after British paramountcy had lapsed on August 15th. Was he truly a sovereign ruler capable of making that decision? Plus, there were horrific reports of communal violence around the same time. Accounts, like in the Statesman newspaper, alleged that Dogra state forces, alongside Hindu and Sikh militias, carried out massacres of Muslims in the Jammu region between September and November 1947. Some reports claim the Muslim population share in Jammu dropped drastically from over 60% to under 40% due to killing and forced displacement. These events, combined with the atrocities of the tribal invasion, created incredibly deep communal wounds and fueled the conflict for decades.
And Hari Singh's rule effectively ended soon after. What happened in Gilgit-Baltistan?
His direct rule ended. He eventually abdicated in favor of his son, Karan Singh, in 1952, who then became the constitutional head, Sadri Asat, and later governor, overseeing Kashmir's integration into India. In Gilgit-Baltistan up north, there was a separate event in 1947, the Gilgit Rebellion. Led by a British officer, Major William Brown, the local Gilgit scouts overthrew the Dogra governor and chose to join Pakistan, reflecting their own distinct history and grievances against Dogra Rule. So the end of Dogra Rule was incredibly messy, violent, and left behind a deeply contested legacy.
Wow. That's an incredible amount to unpack. We've covered a full century, from Gulab Singh's controversial acquisition of Kashmir through the Treaty of Amritsar, right up to the chaos of partition and the signing of the Instrument of Accession by Hari Singh. We've seen these Maharajas trying to consolidate power, introduce reforms, sometimes modernizing, sometimes superficial, all while dealing with British oversight and these deep, persistent communal divides and economic hardships, especially for the Muslim majority.
Absolutely. From Gulab Singh's purely extractive policies driven by debt, through Ranbir Singh's legal codes and military buildup, Pratap Singh's infrastructure projects under increasing British watch, and Hari Singh's belated reforms. The constant undercurrent was the simmering discontent among the marginalized. That 1931 uprising was clearly a turning point, wasn't it? Transforming those grievances into organized political movements led by figures like Sheikh Abdullah, which directly challenged the legitimacy of Dogra rule itself, leading inevitably, it seems, to the dramatic events of 1947.
It really does show how historical actions may be driven by what seemed like strategic necessity or financial logic at the time can plant these seeds of division and injustice that just keep growing for generations. The legacy of Dogra Rule, this complex mix of administration, exploitation, resistance. It's a stark reminder that the past isn't really past, is it? Especially in places where identity, history, and unfulfilled promises continue to shape the present so powerfully. So thinking about everything we've discussed, the sale, the discrimination, the uprisings, the reliance on external powers, the final accession controversy, what do you see as the single most enduring challenge stemming from that Dogra era that still impacts the region today?